My name is Cassandra Lee Whitmore, and I am 43 years old. I want you to understand something before I begin. I am not a dramatic person. I have never been the woman who makes a scene at a restaurant, who posts cryptic things on social media at 2 in the morning, who calls mutual friends to take sides. I am an accountant. I have spent 20 years of my professional life looking at numbers, finding the hidden story inside balance sheets, the quiet truth that columns of figures tell when you know how to read them. I am a person who believes in evidence. I am a person who believes in patience. So when I tell you what happened on a Tuesday night in March, I need you to understand that what I did was not impulsive. It was not emotional. It was not something I dreamed up in a rage or a heartbreak spiral. It was the most deliberate, most methodical, most carefully constructed thing I have ever done in my life. And I had 47 days to build it. Let me go back to the beginning. Not the very beginning, I'll get there, but the beginning of the 47 days. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind of grey February Saturday that feels like the world has forgotten colour exists. I had come home early from a grocery run because I'd forgotten my wallet, which almost never happens, because I am the kind of person who checks 3 times before leaving. But that day I'd checked twice and driven off, and I'd only realised when I was standing at the register with a cart full of things we needed for the dinner party we were hosting the following weekend. Marcus and Diana were coming, my husband Daniel's old college friend and his wife. We'd been doing these little dinner parties, rotating host duties with 2 or 3 other couples, for years. It was the kind of civilized ritual that makes suburban life feel intentional. I came in through the back door because the garage code is easier than finding my keys. The house was quiet in the way that houses are quiet when they're not supposed to be. Daniel's car was in the driveway. He told me he was going to be watching the game at the Hendersons. I registered this discrepancy with the mild background attention I might give to a receipt that doesn't quite add up. Notable, filed away, not yet alarming. I heard voices in the living room. 2 voices, one of them was my husband's. The other one was Sloane Meredith Calloway, my best friend since we were both 23 years old, sitting in adjacent cubicles at a financial consulting firm where we were both junior analysts too terrified to talk to each other for the first 6 weeks, until she brought a homemade tres leches cake to the office for her birthday and left a piece on my desk with a post-it that said, "I noticed you working through lunch again. Eat this. It's non-negotiable. 20 years, maid of honor at my wedding." Godmother to my daughter Piper, who is now 16 and thinks Sloane hung the moon. 20 years of inside jokes and shared secrets, and that particular closeness that forms between 2 women who have watched each other become who they are. I stood in the hallway. I could hear them clearly. The door was not fully closed. "She has no idea," Daniel said. He was laughing a little when he said it. The way you laugh when something is easy, when you've gotten away with something so thoroughly that the getting away has started to feel like the natural order of things. "She never notices anything that isn't a spreadsheet," Sloane said. "I want to tell you that the ground fell out from under me, that I grabbed the wall, that my vision went white at the edges or my knees buckled, or I had to stuff my fist in my mouth to keep from making a sound. I want to tell you that because it would be a more satisfying story, and maybe it would be more true to how devastating those words were if I described them like a physical blow. But what actually happened is that I went very, very still. I stood in that hallway and I thought, how long? That was the only question in my head, not is this real, not what do I do, just how long has this been happening and what do I not know? I backed out of the house the same way I'd come in. Quietly, I got in my car, I drove to the grocery store, I used the credit card in my wallet, the personal one, not the joint account, and I bought everything on the list. I came home an hour later with paper bags and a bottle of wine we didn't need, and Daniel was in the kitchen when I walked in, and he kissed me on the cheek and said, "You were gone forever." I was starting to worry, and I smiled at him and said, "The parking lot was a nightmare." Sloane was gone, there was no trace of her. The living room was perfectly arranged. Daniel had even plumped the couch cushions. I opened the wine and poured us each a glass and asked about his afternoon, and he told me he'd watched the game at the Hendersons, and I said, "How did it end?" And he gave me a score and I nodded, and we made dinner together like we had made dinner together 1,000 times before. That night after he fell asleep, I lay in the dark and I made a decision. I was not going to react, not yet, not until I knew everything. Here is what you need to understand about me and about what came next. I am very good at my job. I am a senior forensic accountant at a firm that specializes in financial litigation support, which means when companies sue each other, or when someone suspects fraud inside an organization, or when an estate goes sideways and the family starts wondering where the money went, they hire us to find out. I have spent 2 decades learning how to follow money. I know what hidden transactions look like. I know what cover stories look like. I know the particular shape that deception makes when it thinks it's being clever. I also know that when you are doing an investigation, a real one, a careful one, the most important thing you can do in the early stages is not reveal that an investigation is happening. The moment a subject knows they're being watched, they start cleaning up. They start shredding. They start moving things around. You lose the natural, careless evidence that people leave when they believe no one is paying attention. So I didn't confront Daniel. I didn't confront Sloane. I smiled and cooked and went to Piper's volleyball games and attended the dinner party the following weekend where Sloane sat across the table from me and laughed at my jokes and refilled my wine glass, and I looked at her and I thought, I know you. I know exactly who you are right now, and I am going to let you keep thinking that I don't. What I did instead was start paying attention. The first thing I did was pull up our joint financial records going back 18 months. I told Daniel I was doing some year-end review for our investment portfolio, which was true. I did this every year, but this time I was looking for something specific. Patterns, repetitions, charges that didn't fit. I found them within 2 weeks. There was a recurring charge to a hotel in the city, the Aldridge, a boutique place downtown, the kind of hotel you choose specifically because it's quiet and doesn't attract the sort of guests who might know you. $280 a pop. Appearing in our joint account, our asterisk joint account, the one we used for household expenses and shared costs, on the 3rd Thursday of every month for 14 months. I sat with that number for a very long time. 14 months. I'd had no idea. I had reviewed our statements before casually the way you do, but I'd always trusted Daniel to flag anything unusual because he handled the household side of our finances. I handled our investments. We divided the labor years ago and I had not looked carefully at his side. That was my mistake, I own it. I will not make it again. The hotel charge was the clearest one, but it wasn't the only one. There was a restaurant, Ambrosio, Italian, lovely, the kind of place where tables have candles and the pasta is made fresh, appearing 3 or 4 times over the same period on the same account. There were 2 charges at a jewelry boutique I'd never been to, one for $400 and one for $700. There were Uber charges late at night on evenings, when Daniel had told me he was working late and had taken his car. I documented everything. I printed nothing at home. I used the printer at work in my private office and I kept everything in a locked drawer there. Then I moved to the second thing. Sloane is also an accountant. Not forensic, she went into corporate finance, ended up as CFO of a mid-size pharmaceutical distribution company called Viridian Health Partners. She's brilliant. She's genuinely, frustratingly brilliant, and she was the one who taught me half of what I know about how to read a company's internal reporting. We used to quiz each other. We used to call each other when we got stuck on something tricky and talk through it over the phone for an hour. I knew her work life almost as well as my own, and I knew because she had talked about it, casually, offhandedly, the way you talk about things you think are too tedious to matter, that she had been having trouble with Viridian's board for the past year. Disagreements over capital allocation. A new board member who thought the CFO was too conservative. She'd mentioned it a few times, dismissed it as politics, said she had it handled. I pulled Viridian Health Partners' public filings. They were a private company, so the options were limited, but there were some court filings, a supplier dispute that had gone to arbitration that contained financial disclosures. I read them carefully. Something didn't add up in their accounts receivable cycle. It was subtle. The kind of thing that only matters if you're looking for it, but I'm always looking for it. I filed that away and kept going. The third thing was harder, and I am not going to be entirely specific about how I did it, except to say that I have a colleague named Rhonda who does digital forensics, and we have worked together for 11 years, and when I asked her over lunch one day, framing it as a hypothetical, a case question, about recovery of deleted text messages from a shared family plan, she gave me a very detailed and practical answer. I am leaving it at that. What I found in those messages was worse than I expected. It had been going on for 2 years and 3 months, not 14 months. The hotel charges represented only the period when Daniel had started using our joint account, whether through carelessness or some kind of contempt I haven't fully decided. Before that he had been paying cash. Sloane had been reimbursing him. I found references to this in the messages. "I'll give you the cash Thursday. Don't use the card this time." And then, at some point, that carefulness had eroded. They'd gotten comfortable. They'd gotten sloppy. They thought I would never notice because I was, and I am quoting my husband here in a message to my best friend about me, his wife of 15 years, too busy feeling important about her little fraud cases to actually pay attention to anything real. I read that message 3 times. Then I went back to work. I want to pause here and tell you about Piper, because she is the reason I took 47 days. Because she is the reason I did this the way I did, instead of the way I wanted to when I was lying awake at 3 in the morning, and the anger was so big it felt like a living thing sharing the bed with me and my sleeping husband. Piper is 16, and she is one of the most extraordinary people I have ever known. She has her father's cheekbones and my stubbornness and a sense of humor that is entirely her own. She plays volleyball and she is teaching herself bookbinding and she wants to study marine biology. She adores Sloane. She has adored Sloane since she was old enough to toddle toward her at the door. Sloane taught her to bake croissants. Sloane drove 4 hours to watch Piper's first varsity game. Sloane called her on her birthday every single year without fail, at exactly midnight, because she knew Piper thought it was cooler to get the first call of the day. Any action I took would affect Piper. Any explosion would have shrapnel, and some of that shrapnel would hit my daughter, and she did not deserve that. So whatever I did, I needed to be surgical. I needed to be precise. I needed the damage to land exactly where it belonged and nowhere else. This is why I took 47 days. And in those 47 days, I also found out about the money. 3 weeks in, I got a call from a woman named Patricia Ewan. Patricia was the head of internal audit at Veridian Health Partners, and she was calling me on my professional line because someone had recommended our firm to her. She was careful on the phone, measured, the kind of measured that tells you someone is calling from a situation they don't fully trust. She said she was looking for an external forensic review. She said there were some irregularities in the company's accounts that she had not yet brought to the board because she wasn't sure who on the board she could trust. My hands went very still on my desk. I asked her to tell me a little more about the nature of the irregularities. She described a pattern of vendor payments, a subsidiary account, nominally a logistics contractor, receiving monthly payments for services that couldn't be verified against any actual delivery records. The subsidiary was called Callaway Logistics LLC. I wrote that down. Callaway is Sloane's maiden name. Her married name is Rafferty. She married and divorced in her 30s, but her maiden name is Callaway. I told Patricia that we would be delighted to assist her, and that I would personally lead the engagement, and that we should keep our communication between the two of us for the time being. She agreed immediately, with the relief of someone who has been carrying something heavy alone. I spent the next 2 weeks doing the most important work of my career. Callaway Logistics LLC had been incorporated in Delaware 18 months ago. The registered agent was a shelf company, a service that provides registered agents for a fee, no questions asked, used constantly by people who want a layer of distance between themselves and an entity. But the bank account attached to Callaway Logistics, through banking records subpoenaed as part of our engagement, all entirely legal and properly documented, told a different story. The account had 2 authorized signatories. One of them was Sloane Meredith Rafferty, née Callaway. The other was Daniel James Whitmore, my husband. The account had received, over 18 months, a total of $412,000 from Veridian Health Partners, routed through 3 different vendor codes to obscure the pattern. Of that amount, approximately $60,000 had been withdrawn in cash in amounts small enough to avoid automatic reporting flags. The remaining $352,000 was sitting in the account, which I found extraordinary, that they had just let it sit there, that they hadn't thought about what to do with it yet, that they were perhaps waiting for more, or perhaps waiting for the right moment, or perhaps were simply the kind of people who never thought past the getting. I printed everything, twice. I kept 1 copy in my office and 1 copy somewhere else, somewhere I'm not going to specify because I am still a careful person even now. I also at this point called my attorney. Her name is Geraldine Park, and she has been my personal attorney since I was 31, and we handled my mother's estate together. She is 70 years old and has the energy of someone half that, and the patience of someone who has seen absolutely everything and cannot be surprised. I told her what I had. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Cassandra, how are you holding up?" I said, "I'm fine, I'm very focused right now." She said, "I know you are, that's what worries me a little. And then, what do you want to happen?" I told her everything I wanted to happen in precise order. She said, "Give me a week." She needed 4 days. The dinner happened on a Tuesday, which was unusual. Normally our social calendar runs on weekends, but Daniel had suggested the previous week, casually over breakfast, that we should have Sloane over for dinner, just the three of us, because he hadn't seen her in a while and thought it would be nice. He delivered this with the specific kind of casual that I now recognized as performance. He was watching me when he said it, I realized, testing for some reaction. I said, "That sounds lovely. I'll make the lemon chicken she likes." His shoulders relaxed in a way that made me want to close my eyes. I said the same thing to Sloane when I texted her, "Come for dinner Tuesday, I'm making your lemon chicken." She responded with 3 heart emojis and "I'll bring wine." I spent Tuesday in my office, working, methodical and focused. I had a 9 o'clock call with Patricia Ewan, during which I told her we were close to having a complete picture. I had a 1 o'clock meeting with Geraldine, who handed me a folder and walked me through each item and confirmed that everything was in order. I had a 3 o'clock call that I took from my car in the parking garage, sitting in the quiet grey concrete with my hands in my lap, because I didn't want anyone to see my face during it. I went home at 5, I changed out of my work clothes, I made the lemon chicken. I made it from scratch, the way Sloane had taught me, the real version, with the preserved lemons she'd brought back from a trip to Morocco 7 years ago and left in my pantry. The ones I'd replaced once since and would never tell her were replaced. I made the roasted vegetables. I set the table with the good dishes. I opened a bottle of the Barolo we'd been saving for a special occasion, poured a glass, and sat at the kitchen island waiting for them. Sloane arrived first at 7, with wine and a box of chocolates, and a hug that she held for a beat longer than usual. Over her shoulder, I looked at the wall and counted to 3 and hugged her back. Daniel came home at 7:15, called out hello from the foyer, reappeared in the kitchen having changed his shirt. He kissed me on the cheek, same as always, poured wine, launched into a story about something that had happened at work, and Sloane laughed at the right moments and I served the chicken. We ate, we talked. It was, and I need you to understand this, almost unbearably normal. We talked about Piper's volleyball tournament. We talked about a movie that was coming out. We talked about Sloane's sister's new baby. We talked about a trip Daniel and I were theoretically planning for the summer, and Sloane said we absolutely had to go to this one particular restaurant in the city we were planning to visit, and Daniel agreed enthusiastically, and I smiled and said I would look into it. I watched the way they didn't look at each other too directly, the way they were careful about their eye contact, had trained themselves over 2+ years to be careful, but that training itself is a pattern. A sober person at a party is conspicuous in their own way. 2 people trying not to look like they have a secret are conspicuous in a very particular way, if you know what you're looking for. I cleared the plates. I brought out the dessert, the chocolate Sloane had brought, arranged on a small board with some cheese and fruit. I poured more wine. And then I sat down, folded my hands on the table and said, "I need to talk to you both about something." They looked at me. 2 people looking at me, and beneath the perfectly neutral expressions, they had both practiced these. I could see the practice in them. There was the very slightest tightening. The animal alertness of creatures that have just heard something in the underbrush. I said, "I've been working on a case for the past few weeks, a corporate fraud investigation. It's actually been quite interesting." I picked up my wine glass. "It involves someone I know." Sloane said, "Oh," the word was perfectly calibrated, curious but not eager. I said, "You know her too, actually. It's at Veridian." I watched Sloane's face. She was good. She was genuinely good. The colour didn't drain, her hands didn't move. Only her eyes, for approximately 1 second, a fraction of a second, the blink between one expression and the next, did something that she couldn't control, and then it was gone and she said, "Veridian, I haven't been there for 18 months, I said, "I know." She stopped. Daniel said, "Cass, I'm not talking to you yet, I said pleasantly. He stopped too. I said it was very elegant, actually. I want you to know that I have professional appreciation for the construction. Using a maiden name for the LLC was clever. Using a legitimate vendor code channel was clever. The cash withdrawals were appropriately sized. I looked at Sloane. You must have been frustrated when I got this case, or maybe you didn't know I had it. Did you know? Her jaw moved, no sound. It doesn't matter, I said. The point is we have everything, the incorporation documents, the bank account, the transaction history, every wire transfer from Veridian to Callaway Logistics going back 18 months, and I looked at Daniel, the account's authorized signatories. Daniel's face had done something complicated. He was trying to decide which version of this he could survive, and his eyes were moving in that particular way of someone doing fast, frantic calculation. I recognized it from 20 years of watching people caught in financial irregularities realize that what they thought was covered is not covered. I want you to understand, I said, that I'm telling you this because I believe you deserve the chance to understand exactly where things stand before I finish this story. You've been very comfortable, both of you, for quite a long time, and I think there's a particular kind of comfort that comes from believing that the person closest to you is not paying attention. I took a sip of wine. It was very good, the Barolo we'd been saving. She notices everything. Sloane said, Cassandra, whatever you think. I know, I said simply. I know about the affair, I know about the money, I know about all of it. I put down my glass. I came home on a Saturday in February and I stood in the hallway and I heard you say that I never notice anything that isn't a spreadsheet. I smiled at her. The thing is, Sloane, I'm very, very good at spreadsheets. The room was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator. Then, and I can still feel the shape of this moment, the specific temperature of it, Daniel started to speak. He said my name. He said it the way he had said it 1,000 times, in the way that once made my chest fill with warmth and now sounded like a stranger doing an impression of intimacy. He said, Cass, we should talk about this privately, not like... Like what? I asked. Like I'm doing it right now, with both of you in the same room. That's not... Because I thought about doing it separately. I thought about confronting you first. I looked at him steadily. And then I thought about confronting her first. And then I realized that the two of you have been in a room together, talking about me for 2 years. You've had 1,000 conversations about what I know and don't know, what I do and wouldn't do, how far you could go before I noticed. I paused. It seemed fair to even the odds. Sloane was very still. She had abandoned the neutral expression. What was on her face now was something rawer, something that in another context I might have called grief, but I was not in the market for her grief. Daniel said, What do you want? I said, Let me tell you what's going to happen. I reached into the bag I had placed seemingly casually on the empty chair beside me. I set 3 folders on the table. I had prepared 3 copies of everything, one for me, one for each of them because I am thorough. The first folder, I said, contains the complete financial forensic report I will be delivering to Veridian Health Partners on Thursday. It documents the entire fraud scheme, including both of your signatures on the Callaway Logistics account. It includes the transaction history, the cash withdrawal pattern, and the legal analysis prepared by our team. Veridian will be filing a civil complaint and has indicated they will refer the matter to the district attorney for criminal review. $412,000 is well above the threshold for felony grand larceny in this state. You are each looking at serious exposure. Daniel had gone a color I had never seen on his face before. The second folder, I said, contains the divorce filing I will be submitting on Friday morning. It cites the infidelity, documented. It also cites the financial fraud as it pertains to the dissipation of marital assets, specifically, the use of our joint account to fund hotel stays and other expenses related to the affair. My attorney has also initiated an asset freeze on our joint accounts pending the divorce proceedings. The accounts were frozen as of this afternoon at 4 o'clock. I checked my watch, about 3 hours ago. Sloane looked at Daniel. He looked back. I watched them have a conversation without words and felt something that was not quite satisfaction, but lived in the same neighborhood. The third folder, I said, is for Sloane. I slid it across the table to her. She didn't touch it. Contains a copy of everything I've given to the Veridian board, I said, and a copy of the report I've already sent to the CPA licensing board regarding the ethical violations involved in what you've done. Your license will be under review. Your ability to serve as a CFO or in any fiduciary financial capacity will be under review. The companies you sit on the board of will be notified as required. I folded my hands. I'm not going to pretend I take any pleasure in this. I paused. That's a lie, I said. I take a little pleasure in this. I think that's understandable. Nobody moved. Daniel said, Cass, please, just let's talk about this. Whatever you want, whatever you need from me, we can. Daniel, I said gently, I need you to stop talking. He stopped. I said, I need you to understand that there is nothing you can offer me tonight. There is nothing you can say tonight. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification. Everything is already in motion. Everything has been in motion for weeks. You had 2 years to come to me and tell me the truth, and you chose not to, and so this is where we are. Sloane said quietly in a voice I had never heard from her, Cass, I'm so sorry. I looked at her for a long moment. 20 years, every big moment I had had in my adult life, she had been in the frame. My wedding day, she had fixed my veil in the mirror of the bridal suite and said, You look like the best version of yourself. When Piper was born, she had been in the waiting room and she had cried, properly cried, when she held her for the first time. When my mother died, Sloane had driven through the night and appeared on my doorstep at 4 in the morning and simply held me, not saying anything, for an hour. 20 years of presence, 20 years of being the person I would have called in exactly this situation. I thought about all of that, I held it. And then I said, I know you are, I also know that you're sorry you got caught, I know that you're sorry this is happening to you. I don't know, I genuinely don't know if you're sorry for what you did to me, and I don't have the capacity right now to find out. I stood up. I'd like you both to leave now. Neither of them moved immediately. And then Sloane pushed back her chair, and the sound of it on the hardwood floor was so normal, so mundane, that it felt surreal. She picked up her bag. She looked at me once more, and I looked back at her, and I let her hold my gaze for as long as she needed. She left. Daniel stayed. He stayed for another 20 minutes, trying variations of the conversation, cycling through anger and appeal and something that looked like remorse and landed on anger again. He told me I was doing this out of pride. He told me I had always been more attached to being right than to being happy. He told me I was going to regret blowing up our family. I listened to all of it. I was very calm. The calmness had been inside me for 47 days, and it was not going anywhere. When he ran out of variations, I said, Piper is at your mother's tonight. You can stay in the guest room, and tomorrow I'd like you to begin making arrangements to stay somewhere else. I picked up the plates from the table, the good dishes, the ones we'd gotten as a wedding present, and carried them to the kitchen. There is chicken left over if you're hungry. He left an hour later. I washed the dishes, I dried them, I put them away. I sat at the kitchen island in the quiet house with a cup of tea, and I stared at the wall, and I waited to feel something break open. It didn't happen that night. It didn't happen the way I expected it to. What happened over the next weeks and months is both very simple and very complicated, the way life always is when the frame shifts and you have to redraw everything. Daniel retained an attorney within 48 hours. The attorney immediately began negotiations, which told me that Geraldine had done her work correctly. There was nothing to fight about. The forensic evidence was bulletproof, the asset documentation was complete, the grounds for the filing were thoroughly documented. We spent 4 months in negotiation, which was brutal in the particular way that formal legal processes applied to intimate life are always brutal. He was trying to protect his assets. I was trying to protect Piper's future and my own, and I was not interested in being gracious about it. I was fair, I was precise, I was not gracious. The house I kept, my retirement accounts I kept, the investment portfolio I had been managing for 12 years I kept. He took his car, his retirement, and a percentage of the equity we'd built together, which is how it works and which I accepted without liking it. The child support arrangements were put in place. Piper splits her time. She does not do this easily, and I do not expect her to. Sloane's situation was more complicated. The Viridian matter went where these things go. There were lawyers and negotiations, and eventually an agreement, civil, not criminal, though it was close. Her attorney was very good, and the DA's office had larger fish to fry that quarter. She repaid the full amount plus penalties, which required liquidating a significant portion of her personal assets. Her CPA license was suspended for 18 months. She resigned from Veridian quietly, in a statement that cited personal reasons, and she was removed from the 2 boards she'd sat on. Her professional reputation, which she had spent 20 years building, was severely damaged. I knew all of this because I am still in the financial world, and these things make their quiet way through the network. I did not track her deliberately. She simply remained legible to me in the way that people you have known for 20 years remain legible, even when you are trying not to look. She called me once 3 months after that Tuesday night. I let it go to voicemail. She said, "I don't expect you to answer. I just wanted you to know that I understand now that I don't have the right to ask you to understand. I wanted to say that I knew even while it was happening that it was wrong. Both things, both of them." And I kept telling myself stories about why it would be okay, and I think that's the most shameful part, not that I did it, but that I was so good at convincing myself it was okay. "I hope you're well. I hope Piper is well. I won't call again." I sat with that voicemail for a long time. I listened to it twice more, then I deleted it. I do not know what I feel about Sloane. That is perhaps the most honest thing I can tell you. I thought I would hate her, and I found that I could not quite locate hatred, not for her. There was too much history for hate to have clean edges. For Daniel, the edges were cleaner. He had been my husband. He had said his vows and meant them or not meant them, and I would never know which, and the uncertainty of it was its own kind of grief. Sloane had been something different. Sloane had been, I keep coming back to this word, chosen asterisk. We had chosen each other. You don't choose your family, you don't choose who you fall in love with, not really, but you choose your friends. You choose them deliberately, and you renew that choice every time you call, every time you show up, every time you say I'll be there. She had chosen me for 20 years, and then she had chosen something else, and what I felt about that was something I still don't have a clean word for. Piper found out in the way teenagers always find out, all at once and with insufficient preparation. Daniel told her his version first, which I had expected, and which was curated in ways that I imagine seemed logical to him, and that Piper, being 16 and perceptive, immediately recognized as curated. She came home from a weekend at his temporary apartment and sat at the kitchen counter and looked at me for a long moment and said, "Dad said it was complicated and you both made mistakes." I said, "That is not exactly the full picture." She said, "I figured." I told her what she needed to know in age-appropriate terms without more detail than necessary. I told her her father had not been faithful. I told her that Sloane had been involved. I watched her face move through 3 or 4 things in quick succession: disbelief, pain, a kind of fierce and focused anger that reminded me of looking in a mirror, and then she said, "Sloane." "Yes." She was quiet, then she called me on my birthday. I know. 3 weeks ago, she called me at midnight like she always does. I had not known that. 3 weeks after the dinner, Sloane had called Piper at midnight because it was her birthday, and that was what Sloane did. I thought about the 2 of them on the phone, Piper not knowing, Sloane knowing everything. I thought about what it costs to make that call in those circumstances, and I couldn't decide if it was brave or selfish or simply the expression of a love that was real, even when the person feeling it was also capable of enormous harm. Piper said, "I'm not going to call her back." I said, "That's your decision, you don't have to." She said, "I'm also not going to. I'm not going to pretend I don't miss her. I think that's okay, to miss someone and also be angry." I said, "That is very much okay." She nodded once and went upstairs. I sat at the counter alone and I thought, she is going to be all right. Whatever else happens, she is going to be all right. I want to tell you about the part that came after, the part I didn't plan for, which is maybe the most important part. I had spent 47 days in total control. I had been a machine of purpose and precision. I had known exactly what I was doing and why, and I had executed it flawlessly, and when it was done, I had the peculiar experience of realizing that I did not know what to do with myself when there was no longer a plan to execute. The first 2 months after that Tuesday were functionally terrible. I want to be honest about this, because I think the narrative I've been telling you has perhaps made it sound cleaner than it was. I had the house and I had my career and I had Piper half the time, and I had done the thing I'd set out to do, and none of that addressed the fact that I was 43 years old and my best friend and my husband had been in a secret together for more than 2 years while I smiled across dinner tables, and that no amount of precision or competence or perfectly documented evidence could touch the part of that which was simply loss. I am not someone who goes to therapy. I was not someone who went to therapy. I am now someone who goes to therapy because Geraldine, who is 70 and has seen everything, told me I should, and I have learned to take Geraldine seriously. My therapist's name is Dr. Amara Osai, and she is patient with me in a specific way that makes me think she has worked with a lot of people who use competence as an emotional management strategy. She has said, gently, precisely, that control is a legitimate coping mechanism until it starts preventing you from feeling the things that need to be felt. She has said this in several different ways over several months. I am working on it. What I have found in the months since is that the grief does not follow the map I drew for it. I expected to grieve my marriage in the obvious places, the anniversary that passed quietly without acknowledgement, the holidays restructured around custody logistics, the ordinary intimacy of having someone in the same bed, same morning, same kitchen. And those things were hard, but what I didn't expect was to grieve Sloane more sharply than Daniel. I didn't expect to be at the grocery store 6 months later and reach for my phone to call her with something funny that had happened, and to feel, in the space where that impulse died, something that was exactly the shape of her. Daniel I had lost before I knew I was losing him. There was a version of our marriage that I thought existed and a version that had actually existed, and when the gap became visible, the thing I mourned was the version I'd believed in, which turned out to be something I had substantially constructed myself. It is strange to grieve a fiction, but I did it. I am doing it still in smaller pieces. Sloane I mourned differently, because what Sloane and I had been was real, 20 years of something real, and what I keep arriving at, in the long careful sessions with Dr. Osai and in the small hours and in the ordinary moments of a life being rebuilt, is that I don't know how to make those two things coexist, the reality of what we had and the reality of what she did. I have not found a way to flatten them into a single story. I have decided to stop trying and to simply hold them both, the love and the betrayal, without requiring them to resolve. It has been 14 months since that Tuesday. I want to tell you what 14 months looks like. Piper made varsity captain this fall. She came home from the announcement and found me in the kitchen and said nothing, just walked in and hugged me in the sudden fierce way she does sometimes, and I held on and thought, here, this is the thing nothing can touch. The house is different now. I painted the living room a colour I had wanted for years and Daniel had thought was too dark. He was wrong. It is a deep green, the colour of old library walls, and in the evening light it makes the room feel like an exhale. I have new bookshelves. I have a chair by the window where I read in the mornings with my coffee, which is my favourite part of every day. My firm promoted me to partner in the spring. The Veridian case, my documentation, my analysis, the completeness and precision of the report was a significant factor. Patricia Ewan sent me a note when it was over. She said, "Thank you for being the person who found it. I kept that note in my desk drawer. I take it out sometimes." I have started cooking for pleasure rather than as a household task, which is new. I cook things I like. I have made Sloane's lemon chicken exactly twice since that night, because it is the best version of that dish I know, and I have decided that I am allowed to keep it. I don't say it's her recipe when I serve it to people. I also don't pretend it's mine. I went on a date in October, which was terrifying in the specific way that things are terrifying when you are out of practice and have forgotten the emotional vocabulary. The man was kind and interesting, and we talked for 3 hours, and I came home and sat in my green-walled living room and thought, just that. Just the small, surprised sound of something being possible. What I know now at 43, after the 47 days and the months that followed them, is this. I am not the person who doesn't notice things. I never was. I have spent my entire career noticing things, and I am very good at it, and the fact that I did not notice this particular thing sooner was not a failure of attention. It was the particular blindness that comes from love, from trust, from choosing not to look at someone you love with the same forensic eye you turn on the world. There is nothing wrong with that blindness. It is a reasonable consequence of being human and loving people. But I am not blind anymore, and the world, examined closely and without the particular tenderness of someone who wants everything to be fine, the world is still full of things worth seeing. I notice everything, I always have. I just know now where to look. I am posting this because someone in a group I'm part of asked me to. They are going through something similar, not exactly this, the circumstances are different, but the feeling of standing in a hallway knowing that the story you have been telling yourself is not the one that's been happening. They asked me how I survived it. They asked me how you keep going when the people you trusted most have restructured reality behind your back. I told them very carefully, one step at a time with documentation. But there is something else, I told them, which is the thing I want to leave you with, because this has been a very long post, and you have been very patient and I appreciate it. The night after Daniel left, after the dishes were done and the house was quiet and I was sitting at the kitchen island with my tea, I sat there for a long time waiting to feel broken, and instead what I felt was something I did not have a name for at first. It took me a few weeks to find the name. It was space, that was what it was, an enormous, astonishing amount of space. For 2 years, and I did not know this consciously, but I know it now, some part of me had been carrying the weight of something that wasn't right. Some part of me had been registering the wrongness quietly in the background, without surfacing it into full awareness. The body knows things before the mind does. The body is a very good accountant. And for 2 years, without knowing it, I had been spending enormous energy on that background processing, on managing the low-grade static of a reality that didn't add up. When it ended, when the truth was out and the plan was executed, and the house was mine, and I was alone in it for the first time in 15 years, the static stopped. And the space where it had been was so big, and so quiet, and so entirely mine, that I sat in it for a long time before I understood what it was. That is what I want to say to the person who asked me how you survive it. You survive it and then you get the space. And the space is yours, you can do anything with it. You can build anything in it. You can put bookshelves up. You can paint the walls green. You can sit in the morning light with a cup of coffee and read something that has nothing to do with any of it. And for whole long stretches, you can simply be someone who is alive and has a daughter who made varsity captain and a job she loves, and a world full of problems that are not about her, but that she knows how to solve. It is enough, it is honestly more than enough. It is very nearly everything.